Okay.
All right, we're good.
Okay. And are we on visible on Zoom?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Let's call the meeting to order.
And second.
It is 7:11. We'll call the October meeting of the Narberth Planning Commission to order. To the world at large, we are broadcasting you live from the big room. Narberth Borough Hall. All planning commissioners are accounted for. Jennifer Iacone, our alternate, is on travel status and is not here tonight. We are joined by Kevin Walsh, the Borough Zoning and Building Official, by Jim Spear, Chloe Moore online, and Timothy Staub. Chloe and Timothy are our planners from Montgomery County Planning Commission. I believe that covers everything, right? Okay. So, as to tonight's agenda, we have only two items on our agenda tonight. One is to further discuss the definitions and mapping of certain commercial uses, and hopefully with the tools we provided, we can come to resolution on that. And second, to discuss...
I'm so sorry. I have my sound off.
Let's move to the other room.
I'll just leave it. Was it better or worse than the sound in the other room?
Close call.
Yikes, I apologize.
And the second item is a discussion of language for conditions regarding the design of buildings improved by conditional use. So we will begin with updates. I have no update myself, nothing to update you on. We do have an update from Tim that I sent to you about the active transportation plan. So you have any questions about that plan and what's going on that you'd like to ask them? Okay. Michael, I'm not putting you on the spot. I didn't ask you, but would you mind, can you give us a quick update on the parks master plan?
Yes, at the last meeting, we had a lively discussion, scope of work. Some members of the Planning Commission were there. If you all have any thoughts you wanted to share as well. But basically, we did not take any action to recommend the scope of work. Members of the Study Commission discussed kind of what the existing scope of work looked like. We postponed that action to our next meeting, which will occur at our normal Wednesday time. So it should be Wednesday next week at, I believe, 7 p.m. And I can confirm that. And thereafter, kind of the process will continue. But at this point, we're still just looking on making a recommendation to Borough Council on what a scope of work for a consultant in that planning process would look like. Are there any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, when do you expect that you'll have it figured out? When is the RFP slated to go out?
I think the expectation is that we are expected to vote on a recommendation on the scope of work at the next meeting. I think we were slated to vote on it at the last meeting, but I don't think folks felt like they had enough time to digest that. I know I had many questions about that process. Some of those were aired during that meeting. Some of them I think are probably still a bit unanswered, but may have to be ironed out with the manager.
Are there problems about the work the consultant would do or the scope of the study?
Well, so one of the questions was specifically related to Town Square Station Square. And I think that the draft scope of work that kind of we were working with, that I kind of like tried to help craft a little bit, had considered that to be an alternate within the project. because that way, someone could bid on it, but if they bid on it, it would be an alternate. It could be up to us as to whether we accepted that as an alternate or not. The manager gave the feedback at the last meeting that his understanding was that we needed to include it because it was in our grant application to the state. I'm not advised as to the backstory on that, but that was what he said. So I think there were kind of, so the current iteration of it that I've been trying to kind of work on to help put forward, as far as regards that component of it, specifically calls out the expectation that that component of the project would be reactivated to continue from the pause point. And that the working group for that portion of the project would be reactivated to continue overseeing that part of the project. Now, that's, I've written it that way in my kind of proposal, and I'm one member on the body, so we'll see kind of where that ends up. But that was one of the kind of main discussion points from the last meeting. There was a large discussion over how much detail needed to be included and how closely we needed to hew toward DCNR, the state agency's template. So there was kind of like a lot of nuts and bolts type things. And I tried to take a lot of the feedback that was provided at that last meeting and try to reconcile it as best I could so we could start, from the next, like not have to go over all of that again at the next meeting. So it was a fairly involved discussion, I think, as some of the folks who were there could probably attest to, but that's kind of like in a nutshell, a summary of where that meeting I think ended and where our next meeting is probably going to begin.
Who wrote the draft RFP?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So first there was a template from DCNR that was given to the borough. And then I'm not sure someone did a first iteration of a draft, and that was circulated. And then I took that draft and tried to cycle it through, like make it more of something that we would, like the version that I had received, I didn't think personally was fully kind of like where it didn't provide like certain details that maybe should be inclined, it didn't have like certain expectations baked into it that I thought maybe we would want to see. So I put it through 2 iterations in terms of trying to like get feedback from folks on the study. We're obviously limited in the number of folks we can talk to, but in terms of with the chair, feedback from the borough manager, and then feedback at the meeting. And so I've tried to reconcile that information as best as possible in terms of the current iteration of it that I put forward. I haven't seen any other versions, so I'm not taking it as a given that they're going to use that work product. It's always possible that someone else could do something else, but I haven't seen anyone else do anything else, so my assumption is that we may start from that draft. So to the extent that this body or anyone on this body has any additional feedback, send it to me and I will try my best to incorporate.
Is there a working list on who this would go out to? I mean, is this going out to landscape architects or planning firms or who? What?
What kind of consultant?
Yeah.
And is it a single person or is it a firm?
I do not know the logistics of that question, but I will ask.
Who's running the procurement?
I'm not entirely, so the borough is managing kind of like the scope of work and then the RFP process in partnership with DCNR.
What does that stand for?
It's the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. So they're the ones who funded most of the grant through which we're going to be doing this process, so everything needs to fly through them, is my understanding.
I might have missed this, but what happened to Simone Collins?
Well, what was explained at the meeting when that question was raised was that we were told that this necessarily has to be a competitive process, and therefore they can certainly be invited to submit a proposal.
Okay.
But that it will be, there's no guarantees that they would get it.
But if we pull Station Circle or Square or whatever out of it, that becomes a moot point, doesn't it? It's
I
money.
don't think it's a moot point. I think it makes a lot of sense to have a holistic view from the consultant, you know,
That includes
that
Station.
includes Station Circle, but you know,
Such a different kind of project.
I don't know.
Yes.
And you're saying
There is
that's why it's
currently a line in there about not duplicating work already performed.
But what's Simone Collins's scope? Are they done technically? Does anyone know?
I don't remember the specific scope, but I don't think it went beyond schematics. And the scope was extended when they went through this whole thing with Samantha on, you know, on the nodal accessibility thing. I think they had an additional scope.
And the tunnel under the tracks.
Oh, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sort of sucked the air out of the room.
yeah. Because, I mean, not to keep repeating the same thing, but these projects don't exist in isolation.
No, well, and I, see, what I don't know is, and I'd have to go back and reread their agreement, I don't know if when they got kind of waylaid to do this other thing, whether the original scope, I don't believe the original scope was completed at that point, whether they ever went back and completed the original scope, or they're still waiting to get the go-ahead to do that, I don't know.
That would be.
I suspect that's the case.
And I would think your group might be the good one to.
Because it is a question
I
of
had
scope.
heard, and I forget where the source of this was, I had heard someone state to me, when I asked them what the deal with Simone Collins was, I had someone said to me that their contract was over, that whatever their scope of work had done had ceased, but I can't remember off the top of my head who said that to me, and I don't know the backstory.
I don't remember seeing a work product that, in my mind, would represent a completion of their scope.
Yeah.
You know, again, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't, but once they started to get into this other stuff, I think all the rest of us who were involved in it up to that pretty much got cut out of it.
But is it, did I hear you correctly, Mike, Lisa, in the draft you wrote for your group's consideration, you're suggesting that Station Circle group get back together to continue
Yes.
that process?
And and I think we also brought that up to air that out as a concept at the last meeting so that folks were up to speed on that idea. I think it makes a lot of sense because there's obviously a large amount of institutional knowledge existing. And especially for the study group body, only speaking for myself, for the study group body, there's going to be a large amount of things that I think we're going to have to oversee as part of that it makes sense to me to have a entity with institutional knowledge whose specific role is to oversee particularly complicated component of what is theoretically this broader plan.
The only other information I have, I read in Mary Jo Daly's newsletter that she has secured, like 200,000 or more than that for the next phase of design work on Station Circle.
Really?
I heard what you just said. You don't know that they finished the first phase, right? But I read this in her newsletter where she was bragging about all the special appropriations she got for her district. She got another one actually to study further renovations to the borough facilities.
Good.
Read her newsletter.
I mean, if
And you will see
I think-
where she's listed these funds that she's obtained for the borough. So I don't know, maybe this will pick up.
Well, it seems like what would help close the first phase of development and open up the pertinent questions to the next phase, where did they land with their scope for the first design phase, because that, to my mind, is always key to coordinating projects. When you have more than one, and you have a budget that you're working within, you need scope. You need to know what that first scope was and what the questions were, so that when you're moving on to the next and you're coordinating with these other projects, there's a clear idea about cost and scope.
Well, the easiest way to do that is to have a conversation with Bill Collins,
Yeah,
with the contractor in front of you, and ask that question.
So
Yeah.
they didn't have like a final submission.
I have no idea. Like I said,
mean, council
we
may
were
know.
pretty much cut out of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, I have no idea
Yeah.
what their latest, I won't say final, but what their latest work product is.
You want to call him, Dave?
Not particularly.
I don't.
In 2 days' time, I'm gonna be-
calling Bill Collins.
yeah, I was gonna say, I think that it'd be a question for council.
I mean, well, I'm not sure whose question it is, but beside the fact that we're going to be out of town shortly, and, you know, I don't feel like spinning wheels, frankly.
Your next meeting is a week from now? A week from now?
I believe it is, and I'm trying to find out.
The expectation is that you're going to have an RFP ready to forward to council for their
No, so the RFP would be the future step. The first one would be just the scope of work generally, recommendation on that. And then I think RFP would be the next step in that process.
Does your committee have any further insight into these questions than Dave and Jim have?
Say that again?
Does your committee have any further insight into these questions than Dave and Jim have as to what happened with that work?
The extent of our knowledge is the discussion that occurred at the last committee meeting that Dave and Jim were both at as well. So no.
Well, there is a borough council person on their committee, one.
It's pretty
Yes,
scary.
but she
Came in
I can't
late.
remember my
yes,
kids'
yeah,
name.
she has not. She was not on council at that.
Okay, but maybe she can.
Yeah.
Okay.
What if we requested
An update.
that the borough staff update the community.
The community, yeah.
Including the commission and your work group on the status of the work that Simone Collins has done, including the presentation of all deliverables that they
Yeah,
provide.
they really
Yes,
should.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Now, that may happen at a council meeting, so we all have to watch on Zoom. Feels like, why should we be like chasing
Right.
tails here?
I agree.
Well, I'd be happy to like include that in the letters I periodically write to
That would be
council, but we should make
terrific.
we should be formal.
Second that.
Make a motion.
I have I have 8 pages of final documents that I believe were presented to council in January of this year. They're saved in our folders. I think they're from the borough website though. Narberth Station Square.
That's
If I
awesome.
share my screen, only like 2 of you are going to see, but Tim has it too. It's like these host disabled participant screen sharing. Well, it's
What's on the title block for what they are?
it's Simone Collins. They just say everyday use draft, option A, pedestrian space only, community events draft, option A, concert draft, option A, everyday use, option B, community events, option B, and movie in the square, option B. And then there's like sections on the last 2 pages.
So the operative word there is draft.
And
It's not a final-
options,
it's not
and
a final,
options, yeah.
Right. There's six different configurations. I don't know if this is potentially their final product. I don't know.
It doesn't.
I'll see if I can find a link to it from the borough website.
There's-
Log in via SharePoint.
Yes, so that's the problem. I found that as well, but I can't actually view any of it.
Do you actually have the documents, Chloe? Can you send them to us? Because we
So-
can't log to the webpage.
Yeah, I downloaded them into our files so Tim can access them too. They're just Narberth Plans Project Studies Station Circle Town Square, and it's the huge file that's in there from January of this year. They might be too big to email, but I'll see what I can do. I can probably put them somewhere where you can download them.
Dropbox link.
Yeah.
Send us a Dropbox link.
Okay.
But I also like the idea of a presentation that could be more like a public forum.
Yeah, it should be because we've had an initial public meeting.
That's what we have asked for
Yeah,
previously, is a final
yeah.
presentation or a repeat presentation of what purported to be the final presentation of the schematic effort. Let's have it again.
Yeah.
Remind everybody where we got to.
Yeah.
It was several years ago now. I don't remember very well.
Well, apparently January of this year was that.
I wasn't invited. Why should I have been invited?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's see what we get from Chloe or Tim or whoever. All right.
I can email you the pictures of each of the pages, which because it's an 8-page document, so.
Okay.
And I guess the truth is, if he did make a presentation of this nature to council in January, then it was made. And I guess what we would then ask is for a thorough update on what's happened since then. Grants, contract extensions, what have you.
Yeah, Matt, where the status of the status of the contract with Simone Collins, I guess, be
That,
part of
yeah.
that.
Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to the next item, which is to approve our minutes of September 6th, which were distributed over the weekend. Does anyone have any comments or corrections or other remarks to make about the minutes? I already made mine and Michael fixed them, so any other comments? Okay, is there a motion to approve the minutes as submitted?
Make a motion to approve.
Any second?
Second?
All in favor of approving the minutes as submitted? Any opposed? Okay. With our thanks, Michael, we will post those
Once again, very complete,
on the webpage.
even though I'm not sure I was there. So that's the previous one.
I heard Kevin say that he may not be able to stay for our whole meeting. And hopefully we're not going to have a whole meeting tonight, Kevin, but in respect of that.
I'm fine till 10 o'clock in case, not a problem.
Oh.
Yeah.
I guarantee you it'll be over by then.
I'm trying to get rid of these guys along faster.
All right, I have the 8 o'clock.
Follow my lead. Monday Night Football. All right. So what I'd like to do is switch the order of discussion. Start with discussion of conditions regarding building design first, and then move to the zoning issues. So you all have hopefully a one-page and then some set of notes entitled "Proposal for Conditional Use Requirement Related to Building Design." The genesis of this document is our anticipation that there will be important new developments in our borough, for which we care very strongly about how the architectural design turns out. In particular, that if we approve a project and see a design that we would expect for the building to be built in conformance with what we see and approve. Now, in ordinary zoning and land development circumstances, that's not really possible. The law does not allow us to have that kind of control over things, at least the way our code is written, or without going to greater extent to reshape how we manage applications. In the short run then, one option we have, which has sort of in concept been agreed to by the solicitor, is that if a project is being reviewed under conditional use, that is, where the borough has the opportunity to establish conditions under which it will grant approval. This is different from a single-family house. This is a more major development. That we can request a condition that the building be built according to the designs that are submitted. It sounds pretty simple. And so, with the sort of blessing of the Borough Council President, Kevin, and Dave and Jim and I met recently to try and figure out what the kind of issues with that are and what a process for managing that might look like. Fred, the Borough Council President, asked me to get recommendations for the Planning Commission about how to do this. And so what you see in front of you is what we were able to tease out with Kevin's help. Kevin, of course, being the day-to-day point person on all these matters, right? And so what you have in front of you touches on a couple of main topics. One is, it just states the authority under which we would do this. Like what's the hook legally? And the authority under which we would do this is in our code, in the part of the code that describes basic conditions that any conditional use has to meet. One of those is that the conditional use is harmonious and appropriate in design, character, and appearance with the existing or intended character and quality of the development in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. The problem is there's no objective standards for that. There's like no boxes you can check. And so our proposal that we're putting in front of you is that the box you check is that what I just read you is defined by what we approve in the drawings. The drawings become the objective standard, which we discuss with the applicant, we discuss with the public, which we approve, recommend, and the council approves. That is the objective standard to which the applicant is then held. So that's the authority. Secondly, then the next question is, what's in these drawings? Like, what would they include? What this proposal says is two things. One is it says the rendering should show materials, colors, and architectural features that are intrinsic to conveying the appropriateness of the design, character, and appearance of the building that are material to achieving the objective of the conditional use. The rendering should not show aspects of the design that would reasonably be adjusted during the construction process and which have no material impact on achieving the objective. Then it says more detail to come. And hopefully Jim's thought about that some more.
Yeah,
So we'll call on you in a second.
I'll be quiet.
Okay. The third thing that this discusses is the monitoring process. Like how would you know when something goes awry? All construction in the borough is monitored to a different degree by the code enforcement officer, also by the borough engineer, and also by third parties who are hired, sometimes even by the developers, to provide independent monitoring of certain things like stormwater systems and other parts of the engineering of the project. And Kevin can speak to that if you have questions about what I'm referring to. So there's a lot of different ways there's verification that goes on. And so what we're recommending is that, because it would be kind of a stretch for Kevin to go there every day for half an hour and look at the thing, that the applicant would hire a third party monitor to monitor the construction and verify the building is constructed and would be responsible for reporting to the borough or to the borough enforcement officer when there is a variation from the design. The last, it's two more parts. The next part is enforcement. So if there's a variation, like if it's not built the way it's drawn, what happens? So a couple of suggestions came to the table. One is, and this apparently is typical for other aspects of the development, that the borough should receive an escrow payment and hold that escrow payment to ensure the consistency of the design, and only release the escrow payment at certain thresholds if the design is consistent with what was approved. And this apparently, and again, Kevin can explain this more if you'd like to know, is the way that certain requirements, like engineering requirements, are maintained. And the borough will not release that money unless they meet these thresholds. So another option is a stop work order and a demand that the applicant correct the variation. And believe it or not, that has happened here in Narberth. We'll ask Kevin about that if you want to ask. He described to us some circumstances. What's that?
Recently?
Very recently. And the third is to withhold a certificate of occupancy until a variation is resolved. And so the last thing this memo says is, how would you resolve variation? One is you can correct it, or you can request an amendment to the final design, which would have to be granted by council and recommended by the planning commission, which would be the case for any. You remember how Adam kept coming back to us for 650 Montgomery every time he got a different tenant and he had to change things? That's the process you'd have to go through. He did it. He got a new tenant. He came back to us and said, I got to change things for my tenant. Here's what I changed. He got our approval. So that would be the process that has to go through. So this is the outline. And the objective today is to sort of get your feedback. Kevin can answer your questions. And what I'd like to do is forward on a recommendation about something to council. This would not be an ordinance. This would not require that kind of process. It would simply be a condition, right? Which we could just pull out of our pocket and put on the table when the project comes along. Some of this stuff is just administrative procedure, which again doesn't need anything but, you know, the staff and council say, yeah, we can do this. And so this could be adopted without any of that, you know, complicated process that we see when we're doing zoning amendments. And then what we would have to do as a planning commission is when a conditional use project came along where we felt this was appropriate, we have to say, we have this. Last thing I'll say about it is in municipalities where there's a lot more volume of development, and a lot more complicated development, there are often what are called standard conditions that are just immediately when you come in the door, you get 80 pages of conditions you have to meet. And that's how business is done in that community. And so this would kind of be like that, right? It would be a standard condition that could be applied in any case where we thought it was relevant. That's my spiel. So, Jim, would you like to say anything more about the drawings?
Sure.
This would require?
Well, there's several sticking points along this road. One of which is, if I'm the developer, I'm going to show you as little as I can to leave myself with as much wiggle room as I can. I'm going to say, building is made of masonry. I'm not going to say it's made of red brick. I'm not going to say it's got aluminum windows painted powder coated white. I'm not going to say, I'm going to try to get away with saying as little as possible. So one of the challenges that we will have in implementing this is to hold the applicant's feet to the fire with regard to those things that he shows us in pursuit of our recommendation of approval. Now, we've had recently several new projects built in Narberth. The poster child being the Elm, where the developer was very forthright and had his architect detail and document colors, arrangements, and all the details of construction, and then they went ahead and in the end they built that. Pretty much, as far as I can tell, exactly the way they originally showed it to us. That was a wonderful thing, and the results speak for themselves, whether you like the green brick or not. You know, they proposed it, they had samples of it that they showed us, and that's the brick that they used in the building. And this is, I think, the ideal sequence of events. So we would need to be strong in our requirements for the documentation that is made. I'm reminded, as I say these words, that when we started down this path of form-based code, it was all about show me what you're gonna build before you build it. Don't just show me a box, show me what you're actually gonna build that I'm gonna have to look at for the next 50 years. And that's what this is. This is show me what you're gonna build. The other issue is when. Typically, projects go through a phase of design development. Architects call it design development. We call it preliminary phase. And that's when the developer should know what it's going to look like. Not when he does working drawings, by which point he has committed significant funds to the development of the documents for construction. I think we should require that the building elevations be at a fairly high level of completion and specificity. And I say specificity because it's more than just a cartoon. It's saying this building is built of red brick and it has cast stone trim elements, including lintels and substills. That's what the pictures that were shown to us that we recommended approval of depicted. But they were not built that way, as we all know. The cast stone disappeared completely, and the buildings at one stroke lost a great deal of detail and lost the kind of texture that we were promised we would get. That's just an obvious example. So at the preliminary design stage, I would expect that we would insist upon fairly specific elevations. Even the sidewalk screening that's up there even to this day shows features that are not in the building in question. And I'm referring to 100 Forest Avenue. Just not there. So many people have commented to me personally, as I stand there aghast, what happened? And I think this is an effort to fix that. Now, if I'm a developer, I'm going to be reluctant to play ball here. Seems to me. But that's another level of. That's another problem that we'll have to solve. I could go on, but I won't.
Let's, Dave, do you have anything to add to that, since you've run the conversation?
No, I think that pretty well describes the situation.
So who has questions?
Well, this is only related to conditional use
Correct.
applications. Is that?
It's the only mechanism that we can use.
I think you
But
heard.
that's with the understanding, or the implicit understanding, that it almost goes without saying that any significant project would be done under conditional use. That it's very hard to imagine a significant project that could be done entirely by right.
So the two projects at the corners are both conditional use projects?
That's true.
The Bricklands and the,
No, they were not.
okay.
They should have been.
But if the zoning were 2 stories,
They would be today because
They would be serious.
Yeah.
And Heidi, you heard at our last meeting, the Borough Council Manager say that was, I think he was pretty clear that he wouldn't support that as like an ordinance, even if we had some legal mechanism to do it. So would I consider this to be a sort of a first step you know, usually, sometimes if you take a step like this, then you can figure out what works and what doesn't, and how it might apply elsewhere.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, you mean the proposal is that they just have this language for conditional
Correct.
use?
Yes.
Well, the language, the authority language is already in. It's just generic. It means whatever you think it is.
This is basically a tool to implement part of our code, which already is there, that a applicant has to meet to obtain a conditional use. The problem with our code is there's no objective criteria. And so this is a proposal to create objective criteria for that requirement and a mechanism for enforcing it.
Just to clarify, it's the enforcement conditions, that's basically sort of like an agreement that's struck with the applicant?
Well, this would all be like written up in the conditional use agreement. So yes, it would be part of the land development approval, which is
in order to proceed, they have to agree with that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's like any other condition that is.
I sympathize with this effort. I think it is in the best interest of the character of this community to enforce, for lack of a word, detailing and materiality that is part of an original idea about the place. But I have to raise the flags that have to be raised. You know, when you get to your construction documentation, you can do your wall assemblies, you can have your specifications for whatever your sheathing is going to be, whatever your materials are going to be, windows, etc., on and on. But once those drawings, and let me finish, I know that this is already seems a little drawn out, but once those drawings go to the contractor for bid, they're going to come up with a bunch of numbers, and they're going to talk about supply chain, and they're going to talk about inflation, and maybe there will be a design contingency, and numbers that will start adding up, and that will lead the discussion down the path of value engineering that is related to the volatility of our supply chain economy. I just am wondering, and now I just want to pause for a moment and turn to Kevin and ask Kevin, have you, maybe not directly asking about the stop work order, which I'm very interested to know more about, but have you had any issues with supply chain that have led to significant changes in the original design lately?
Yeah, so I think the stop work order was more construction related. So I know I wear a lot of hats. That was more like a building code, like what I do as a building code official, checking like an inspection for foundation work. So that was like a building code issue. Whereas most of the changes that we saw at these that are concerning to us right now were either supply chain issues or just developer driven decisions or cost, things that had to do with cost, like you said, the value engineering. So I don't think like a stop work order has never come from these changes because we don't have the ability to do that right now.
It would have to be something probably related to code, like you were saying.
Exactly.
So the question is how to leverage design intention with feasibility.
Get a good cost estimate before you start.
Yeah.
Do it in a professional way, not an amateur way. Value engineering is delivering the same value for less cost. Quite a different thing than cheapening. And what we have recently seen in here in Northbrook is cheapening. And I don't think as a group we should tolerate that.
Yeah.
These buildings are going to be here for 100 years, let's say. And there's no way in the world, in the name of bowing to the supply chain situation, that we should lie back and let it happen to us. We just shouldn't. Let it happen someplace else.
Yeah.
Not here.
If I could address your comments. Our role here is not to ensure that the developer makes a profit on his project or maximizes his profit on his project. That's not what we're here for. We're here to review a design and to pass on our recommendation to council on how we feel about it. And when the developer shows us the design and we pass muster on it, we are passing muster on a specific thing. It's his responsibility to have shown it to us with enough pricing and experience that he knows that he can build it. If he runs into problems, whether it's supply chain or price increases, that's, without sounding flippant about it, that's not my problem. My problem is you showed us a drawing and the building doesn't look like that, and I don't know why. And that's what happened to us. We got blindsided on that. And if you go a block up, you see a demonstration that it doesn't have to be that way. And now that same developer is undertaking a far more significant project. And we're a little wary about how that process worked. And this is a developer who has a good architect. He had a good architect for the other two projects. He's capable of designing a good building. And when they show us the elevations for those buildings, for that building, I for one expect it to look like what he showed us. And not superficially look like it, but specifically look like it, because that's what he told us. And he's not under oath. I mean, they're not under oath when they come before us, but essentially, he's testifying that that's what he's doing. And all the rest of it is that's why he's a developer and I'm not, because I don't have the stomach for it. But those guys do.
Wait, I'm going to let Adam ask a question or make a comment.
Well, I think, let's try it. I think that the risk is potential delay to projects that need to revise designs, and because it could be a 1 month at worst case delay. But I think we should, you know, and the good faith effort needs to be to try just to mitigate that delay and have a reasonable resolution process.
I also,
Please go ahead.
I also would like to mention, just agree with Jim, that you don't really know, it's a bit subjective still, and looking at a drawing that even says it's stone, and they even show you a sample of stone, and then it actually becomes something like that, it's going to be hard to draw the line between what's actually presented and what's actually produced.
Right.
Well, I think you need to categorize.
I don't know, maybe I don't think I'm naive after being an architect for 45 years, but I mean, when the guy shows a cap on the top of a building and it says stone as opposed to cast stone, as opposed to aluminum, as opposed to brick, it's pretty specific to me what he's saying it is. And if he says it's stone and it ends up being cast stone, it's not the same thing.
Okay, so what we're asking for is a pre-detailed sketch.
Yes.
Like
Not
almost,
detailed necessarily.
well,
but no,
it's got to be, all the materials have to be.
Detailed to the extent where he describes the material.
And he has a wall section that shows.
No, I'm not asking for a
Well, but the wall section shows how guards go in and out. It's not just flat. You know what I'm saying? It's like in and outs are expensive to build and flat is not, so.
But you know,
I'm a little wary.
I did this a long time, and if he wants to show me a wall section, that's fine. If he shows me a properly rendered elevation, and if it needs to show shadows to show that degree of articulation, then it should. If we're seeing a flat elevation and we know by the site plan that there are ins and outs and this and that doing, then I would probably say, you need to add more to this elevation because it doesn't describe it enough. But I think an elevation of a sufficient scale, big, caveat there, but an elevation, depending on the building, at an eighth or a quarter, will give me personally enough information that I could render an opinion about whether that is an appropriate design.
You don't think, I think they should submit a wall section.
Well, okay.
I think there's a lot in a wall section.
Of course there is. Wall section is the
And
most
it's not
important.
that hard.
It's the most
to-
important
it's not
drawing
that
in the
hard to
building, in the
draw-
drawing set.
And it's not that hard to draw it. If you're gonna
Okay,
do the
that's
rest.
fine.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with that. Because frankly, a decent architect will have already developed preliminary wall sections to get to that point.
What it appears happened with these buildings is that they started out to be masonry buildings, and they wound up being wood buildings. So if a wall section had been drawn, does everybody know what a wall section is? By the way, it's the detail of how the actual walls are made, showing the various materials that are in the walls and their relationship to one another. And had a wall section been done at the preliminary design phase, they would have been back to us for a major change, which is build a wood box and put a veneer on it.
I could be wrong, but I just think that they substituted cast stone sills with brick sills because it was expedient at some point.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that would have helped what we're talking about.
They couldn't do the copings, for example, because it was sitting on wood.
No, that's probably too.
So they did a break metal.
So, yes.
You know what?
I think it's a great,
Jen was going to say,
Okay.
were you going to say something when you go? I don't want you to get run over.
Oh, it's okay. I was following along, and I agree with Adam that I think we are talking about if there's a commitment to materials in a wall section, that perhaps there is something written into this thing that says, if you require a substitution, it must be approved, or something like that, because it's going to come up.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But the other piece, and this is, I have so many questions right now, but the one thing that I want to get out there is the idea of community character and the scale of a building and the details of a building and the material and all the stuff that we talk about every month is one thing. But we're also instituting a new sense of community character that is environmental. Do we have anything environmental to require of all of this in terms of recycled materials or local materials?
Well, don't our conditional uses, at least some cases now, require the green building requirements that we adopted?
Those don't talk about materials. I think those, we do not have requirements like that. I think that would come under the discussion of what the materials are, right? And if it's agreed on that those are the materials that would go in the building, then this process would be able to ensure that those are used. But we don't have we don't have any requirements of that sort for reasons that, go back to many conversations we had over the last year about the difficulty of creating language in a fast-moving environment, about what materials are and how they're used and so forth. So we don't have those materials, but any project that comes in, and certainly one that comes in that would require this approval, we're free to ask those questions, right? Have you explored those materials? Are any of those practical in this case? And then if they are incorporated into design, then that would be part of what is enforced.
But also,
maybe Michael had to say that.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think there's probably two questions that have popped up with me. The first one is for the purposes of reviewing projects in a manner that tries to solve for some of the concerns that have been raised, does establishing criteria under an existing section of the conditional use process that is currently very vague, right? Makes sense, and I think that makes sense. So like in terms of like, I guess the fundamental underlying question that you put forward, and the document that you circulated, that, all of that stuff makes sense to me. I would say that if I thought that that was going to be like the kind of end all be all, I would have more questions and kind of like concerns, but I think that like for the purposes of getting at least some sort of structure that allows us to address those concerns and moving that forward expeditiously in the understanding that we have major projects coming forward to the borough, and we want to have some existing regulatory structure under which to review things such that we can actually enforce what's being presented, then this makes sense to me as that sort of policy. I think that like that there's a second step to that after the fact, which is I actually do think that this type of thing should be in the code and not a not kind of like a standalone policy, just for the purposes of consistency across time, and because I also don't think that this needs to apply to every single conditional use that we see. I think that probably this is most appropriate on the types of projects that we've all talked about here, which are commercial corridor types of projects, to the extent that there is, right, so like one thing is the fact that we have certain classes of housing that only exist through conditional use. So to the extent that we apply this to every conditional use, we apply it to a certain type of class of housing in a way that I think is kind of inequitable generally. But putting that aside for a moment, I think that like if we had I don't think that type of thing needs to long-term apply to smaller types of conditional use projects, but I think it needs to apply kind of like, so anyway, all that to say, I think that I only flagged it to say, I think that I have some unanswered questions in regard to specific things that I think are a stage 2 type thing, for the purposes now of trying to get some sort of enforceability in place so that we can actually have projects that meet the things that they're telling us to meet. I think that what you've put forward, to my mind, meets that, and to the extent that that involves forwarding this, I don't know where it goes from here. We recommend to council that we have this be the implementation tool for that component of the conditional use process. That makes sense to me.
So remember, we would not actually add this to the code.
Right, I'm saying that I actually do think at some point something along these lines should be added to the code, and we should have like a fuller accounting for it, but for the purposes of, I think what it's being raised as right now, it wouldn't be added to the code. It would just be our understanding of how that one section gets implemented.
It could be implemented for any conditional use where we think it's appropriate.
Right,
I don't think
right.
it's appropriate, we don't have to implement it.
Well, I think I have issues with that from a consistency perspective, but I understand what
But
you're
we
saying.
can deal with those when they come up.
Yeah.
I think that's a question for the solicitor.
And it occurred to me,
Or maybe it's certain
Jennifer,
zones.
to address what you just said, we have struggled mighty long and mighty hard to figure out how to have more sustainable construction practices and breaks. And it has always seemed like there have been too many questions from council and too many practical issues. That said, though, a parallel approach like this that has to do with might be worth considering. Someone would have to make it up.
That's why I knew it wasn't a direct connection, but it seemed like based in that follow-up to what Michael was just saying about how this could be a facet of the code somehow, that this seems like an opportunity to think about that.
Well, we talked about this before, and I think it bears repeating that the building will necessarily be designed under the International Building Code, whatever edition is in effect. And and I know we've said this before, but the IBC does a pretty good job at this point in imposing environmental standards, at least for the operational systems in the building, specifically the mechanical, but also the building envelope in terms of the environmental concerns. And that's pretty good. I mean, does it rise to the level of LEED Platinum? No, probably not. But it gets pretty far along the way there without trying to figure out a very arcane, governmental overlay to the basic building code. So for me, I'm pretty satisfied with the idea that there's a code in effect that's widely recognized as the operative code that's going to get us 80% of the way there, maybe more.
I don't want to dwell on this issue too much because it's a topic for another time.
I don't either, but can I just add one existing, and I think everybody knows this, that for the city of Philadelphia, square footage is 50K and up must meet LEED Silver. So it's benchmarked by square footages. And I think that we can use that conceptually to try to think about how we can do better than what IBC is putting forward right now. But it's something just for us to work on.
Yeah, I would be interested to know just what, is it possible to quantify what that difference is between an IBC compliant building and a LEED Silver?
I'm going to call a question on this topic. Let's move on. Adam, what were you going to?
I was going to say, if anyone would like to propose text edits, maybe propose that now, and we can agree on whether or not they should be edits made. Otherwise, could we just...
Right. The only thing I see is, and I'm sure council will ask for this, is a little bit more of a relief valve on getting amendments to the final design, which may be, when we're asked, we could think about that. How, if there is a legitimate, I mean, all of you are saying maybe one day there's a legitimate reason for the applicant to seek a change. Okay, so let's just assume there is. What is the easiest path we can create for that to happen under someone's purview? I mean, I'm thinking here, if we had a town architect, that'd be great. Town architect, that's the way they do in new urbanist towns, but we don't.
I'm sorry, Todd. Doesn't it require, no matter what, you're saying that they could delegate the authority to a town architect to approve changes?
I don't know if that's legal, but conceptually, yeah. I mean,
so to work the problem, we know it's legal for them to come back and request a modification to the agreement, the conditions.
Right.
So why don't we just start with that?
That's right. That's what it says here. I just know we'll be asked, is there an easier path? That's all.
And they can ask the solicitor, can I delegate that function to the zoning officer or something?
Right, and what Kevin will say, because we talked about this, is how do you define what needs to be delegated and what doesn't. But we can, if we're happy, if this gets us that far, then that's pretty good work. We can continue to work on that. So Adam's proposition is, for Adam is suggesting if anyone has any comments about edits or changes they'd like to make, do you have anything you'd like to suggest before we forward something to council? I would also like to make sure Kevin has a chance just to weigh in on anything. Would that be okay if I asked him that now? Before you? Kevin? Hello, beaming down to you from...
I'm still here. So I think the one thing we're still working on is I reached out to the developer at the Elm today. Unfortunately, he's overseas, so I think one of the biggest things for feasibility that we were asking for developers, from my end, I know I don't do like policy, was economically, is this feasible to put back on the developers? That's not for me to determine, but I couldn't get the cost estimates for you in time in terms of what it took to get to the finish line at the Elm. So when I get that, I'll pass that information along. I'm happy to answer any questions you have on any of the three processes, but I think this went with Jen was saying, in terms of monitoring, when it comes to like doing brickwork or installing lintels, they're not like building code things that I check as the building code official or building inspector or whatever you want to call me. So those aren't things that I can flag when they change, as long as they're as long as they're structurally sound, I can't flag those. So I guess that's what this is all designed to do. The escrow payment, to get into that a little better, this is actually going along with what Eric Johnson does for Pannoni as the borough engineer, and they call it the public improvements. So it's certain phases of the project. The ones that I know off the top of my head are like once they get the sidewalk and curbing done, once they get landscaping done, once they get street trees in, they release funds that are appropriate to kind of the completion of the project. And I thought that was a good idea if we could use that same mechanism to where we can release funds at an appropriate measure based on how complete they are. And, you know, if they're 80% doing their materials or their facade work, then we can release the funds. So I thought that was a good idea. I'm just not sure how we'd get that integrated into language. That's kind of all I have. The one thing that I didn't, the stop work order, we did discuss this. I think that's tough to do again, because right now, currently, that's in the building code. So unless it's a building code related issue or a safety issue, that's not a mechanism I can use as the building code official. So unless we change the language to get that integrated in the zoning code, we can't use that as like a zoning mechanism tied to conditional use.
Kevin, couldn't it be written into the conditions?
Potentially. I'd like to see how John would think about that.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and then the CO, that's another thing. The CO, that goes again with Gemma, what she's talking about with the like energy efficiency. You really, as a municipality, you never really want to hold a CO for certain reasons. And I'm not sure that we want to hold back on COs until these variations are resolved. I think we need to find a better resolution that happens immediately rather than we get to the end of the project when they're ready to have a tenant move in and we're threatening to hold a CO. I think we want to get it as soon as we observe these changes or this third party representative notices these changes. I think that's kind of the last ditch effort.
Right.
So I guess then my follow-up question would that be on then, so if the stop work order isn't an option now, then why would we be hiring a third party to do a monitoring process? Because wouldn't the monitoring would be for the purpose of getting to the point of a stop work order if there's an issue there, right?
But realistically, what our conversation led to, again, I kind of wear 100 hats. So the zoning officer is issuing the zoning permit from like a the zoning code standpoint. Then I have the building code. Then I have code enforcement if that pertains to anything property maintenance related. My only tool of kind of citing an owner right now would be through revoking a zoning permit. I'd have to revoke the permit in full if they didn't comply with the code. So I think what Todd was saying, it'd be nice to get this stop work order mechanism within the conditional use so that I can do it that way. Because otherwise I either need to revoke the permit, which tells them they just need to stop work entirely on the project, almost like the permit itself is void, right? And I don't think we want to
can't do anything at that point because the
permit's pulled essentially.
And then revoke the zoning permit,
Right.
There's no project.
Yeah. So what about this then? What I'm hearing is you would have to provide perhaps some model text to make this easy, or someone needs to. You could, assuming that we're okay, the borough is okay with the escrow payment process. You have your escrow fund, and then you have specific milestones of construction. You have an independent, say, architect review at the milestone that it's compliant with the agreement, and then the funds are released at that milestone.
Or you have the independent architect more frequently.
Well, right, and then the stop work, like at those milestones, the permit would be revoked if you're not in compliance within 90 days or something.
Or get some sort of
relief.
Yeah, right.
Right. So you would put like a 90-day clock on it or something if you, or that, and that would trigger your stop work if you're not in compliance with it.
Well, is the third party in that instance? Because I thought that the third party was there because Kevin can't be out there on a regular basis for kind of ongoing. But if we have a milestone, Kevin, would you be able to, if we have like a specific milestone at which that's released, would you be able to do that then? Or is it a matter of that your expertise is not architectural, so we would need a third party?
I think you and I, like Yerkes or me specifically, and probably Planning Commission would need to work on what those milestones that you are interested in are. We have that laid out for the borough engineer on what those kind of milestones mean, and they're definitive no matter what the project is. I don't know what's important to you in terms of milestones. In my head, it would be facades, windows, lintels, roofing, things like, I don't know how specific you want to get to where we will release funds, and I would have to work with you. If I knew exactly what those milestones the Planning Commission was concerned with, yes, I could do those personally, and I know when to be out there and when to be checking those boxes, but I don't know those. Whereas on the Elm, they were out there daily for hours a day, like 4 to 6 hours a day. There's no way in the world I could ever do that. So if that's the level of detail we want, then I think another third party is the option we need to go to.
Kevin, did they do a wall sample prior to construction?
Yeah, they did. They did so they did like a kind of Foursquare sample. That was probably like 10 foot by 8 foot. And it was kind of where all the intersections were between the different materials and how they connected with the flashing and the weep holes and kind of the geogrid behind the brick and the air gaps. So that was all there. And I'm not trying to like single a project out, but I was actually at 650 Avenue, 650 Montgomery today. They're going to have that on a bigger scale in the next few weeks. So they're going to have one for the ground floor. They're going to have one for the apartments. They're going to want to have for the garage and the tenant spaces. So there might be 4 different huge wall samples for 650 if you guys and girls are interested in going up there and taking a look. We just talked about that today, actually.
I mean, that's the first milestone that would be really critical if we're talking about this process. Because then he's very definitely certifying this is what I intend to build. And it becomes a check against the actual building that, wait a second, the building doesn't look like this, why not? And what are you going to do to make it look like this?
Kevin, I think our conception here is that you're not required to be in this process because you've got enough on your plate already.
Right.
That is definitely the conception. I have one other comment to make about what's written in your proposal, Todd, and that is, it says in the language that the developer hires the third-party architect or examiner, and I propose that we should have the borough hire that entity and have a developer pay for it.
Just like a testing agency.
Yes, just like a testing agency. Right. That's the way, testing is always done. And it means that you don't have the fox watching the hen house.
Kevin, is that how other...
Yeah, to jump in on that, as it relates to like construction with third party, they call it special inspections. Again, the building code calls out in chapter 17, there's certain specific things that require these special inspections, like testing concrete samples and steel and rebar and things like that. And the code calls out, you need a third party that specializes in that specific area. So that's how we can require those. And then I have earth engineering or geostructures go out there and they're there 8 hours a day. If we had something similar mechanism, that would be ideal for us to go out there and have them do that.
I mean, I was thinking, and this might be not tight enough, but it might be that the contractor sends the borough the construction schedule and has on the construction schedule, foundation will be poured from this time to this time, walls will be, south facade, east facade, whatever, walls are going up, roof is going in, windows are going in, and you'll have that, and you show up for each one of those elements, which are milestones, and it's not a designated day, so they don't really know when you're coming, they just know you're coming between, the beginning and the end of the assembly, and maybe it's handled in more of a less appointed way. So
what's difficult about that is that we meet for these larger developments, like in 100, 203, and 650, we meet on the Zoom every Friday morning, and we go over kind of the upcoming week's schedule of what we anticipate they're going to do. Do I need to be there 20 hours next week? Do I not need to really be there? So we go over that. I mean, the weather kills that. I might put on my schedule, I need to be there every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday morning. The rain comes and then they don't need me. So that's like difficult. In theory, it sounds great, but practically it just really hasn't worked with the weather for the last couple of projects.
But I mean, any construction project of this scale, the construction specifications would require the contractor to publish a schedule for the entire project. And, at the beginning of the project, that's always one of the first things handed out at the first construction meeting. So that at least gives a framework of what the expectation is.
And then it's updated as can.
Yeah, and then obviously it's updated as needed, but that there's a way to at least establish those points along the way at the very beginning, and then they can obviously be adjusted as needed, but it's there.
I think, I don't really think we need to figure all this out tonight, but I think maybe what is emerging from what you guys are saying is Jim's suggestion that the third-party person be hired by the borough but paid for by the developer. That person probably is in the best position when that schedule is made to determine when they're going to do certain check-ins.
Right.
And we don't need to kind of map that out. That person can, I mean, I've looked at these schedules. You can look and see when it's going to happen, and if they keep the schedule, you can go there and you can see that happen that day.
Right.
Or follow up when it's done and make sure it's done right. As long as that third-party person is in tune with the schedule, they'll know when to show up and check certain things. As Adam said, you can also look at the job and determine some, I guess, thresholds are common, like the wall you were describing, and others might be determined once the schedule is established. So some of that would need to be worked out based on the job. And so I can take all this and update. I don't want you to have any kind of impression that this is the last time you're going to see this. What I'd like to do is send it to council and ask them for support to keep working on this with Kevin and with you guys. So I just feel like we need, this is a level at which we need to go back to council and say, here's what we're thinking. We want to make this into total communities. We need to do more technical work and make sure their questions are raised and answered too, because they're going to have to support this. So I think that's a good resting point.
Mm-hmm. Do you need some sort of motion on that?
Yeah, to go to the meeting or not.
Sorry. You don't have to go along.
That's good. Yeah, you can come and be...
I'll come and do my usual rant.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Michael?
I was just going to ask if you needed some sort of motion on that today, or...
Doesn't seem like
I don't think so. I think we have a good sense of the room. I think we have a consensus that we should present this with the changes you've discussed to council to get council's further input on how we develop this. Understanding we'll come back to the planning commission for further review. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks everyone who's worked on this. Okay, 8:30. Our last topic for the night is discussion of definitions and mapping of commercial uses. And this carries through work that we've been doing for several months. It is a smaller part of the bigger set of zoning changes that we've been asked to look at just to bring the next round of tuning the code up. So I would really like to get this off our desk, so to speak. And I think that, Chloe and Tim have done a lot of work bringing us some ideas and options.
We also have a table of the uses compared to everywhere else, if you guys want.
Compared to everywhere else.
All of your uses permitted, and then the three ones that we're kind of discussing.
Okay.
So you're able to compare and contrast.
I also distributed the pages in the code to everybody. So what I'd like to do is just set this up so maybe we can focus on things. The big picture here is that NCPC, as you know, has identified several types of land uses that they see occurring commonly in places like Narberth and Rapid County that aren't adequately dealt with in our code, and that we ought to think about dealing with, in part because they might be valuable to these new developments that are coming in, or to the kinds of things that we'd like people to bring to Narberth, right? And so it's not just an intellectual exercise, it's actually about making sure that we catch the wave and get the businesses that we'd like to have in the right places. Those are, in general, businesses related to, like, the colloquial way of looking at it is like microbrews and distillery tasting rooms, but places that both manufacture small batches of distilled beverages and also sell them for tasting or maybe sell foods. That's one category. Another category is recreation type uses, and I'll let Tim explain what he means by that a little later. And entertainment businesses, and somewhere in the mix also is studios, like yoga studios, Pilates studios, Little Gym studios, places like that. So our question, what I've tried to do is flag what I think some of the key questions are for us to focus on, like policy questions that will help create sort of a policy guidance on this, so that modifications to the code can be written, and those are listed close to the bottom. And the second thing I think we should think about is each of these kinds of uses we're talking about, where would they be most appropriate? And to think about in the 5A and the 5B district. And it would be handy to think about the way we have commonly thought about the 5A district, which is there's certain things that are appropriate. What's going on?
Working on the air conditioning.
That's a hamster.
Okay, guys. So Saturday night, I went to Laurel Hill Cemetery for a site-specific art performance about what it's like to transition from life to death. And you wandered around the cemetery all night. And you saw all these little vignettes, and then there's a performance at the end. And like I'm having flashbacks to it. It's Halloween-inspired fringe festival. It's following me around. Anyway, think about, there's Montgomery Avenue, but within the 5A district, we tend to think of North Narberth Avenue and Haverford Avenue as having a certain character, and there are possibly big distinctions between the ground floor and upper floors. We think about Windsor Avenue, potentially ground floors and upper floors, and then we think about the other streets, like Forest and Essex.
Can you be that specific within a single zoning district?
We actually are in our code. We have a lot of provisions that pertain to one area or another.
Yeah, sure.
I think what I've talked with Chloe and Tim about is when we get some free time, we might want to actually formalize like sub-districts within the 5A district.
Create an overlay so we can just say,
I don't think I've done
I think that's just a codification issue. But the answer to your question is, yeah, we can.
Okay, all right.
We can't get to the fine grained point where we're only talking about one building.
Okay.
But if we're talking about a group of buildings, then that's okay. We can create a sub-district. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim to help us navigate microbrews, studios, entertainment, and recreation venues.
Alright. So first, in the memo that we sent out, we discussed brewery, pub, winery, cidery, distillery, your whole, basically your alcohol production facilities is the term that we adopt, because when we were reviewing some of the codes that exist out there that regulate it, it's very sporadic and different. Some require you to be producing so much alcohol, or either so much alcohol or just enough alcohol to hit this point, otherwise you're something else. We saw it where Narberth does not have the real estate to get a Budweiser plant being built somewhere. So anything.
Nor would we tolerate Budweiser in our, no matter.
You're probably Budweiser plants that are bigger than the entire borough.
Oh yeah. But so you're not going to see a large facility coming in, so there's not really the need to put a strong restriction on how much to produce, how much not to produce. when kind of looking at it. So you want anything that grows here to be able to expand incrementally. But we also made it a big point in the way we defined it, is that it has to have some level of on-site consumption available, whether it's just alcohol or alcohol and food. That way you're activating the floor space, which at the last meeting you guys expressed a desire to kind of look at. But otherwise, it's kind of where does the brewery belong? And our thinking was like 5A and 5B, really. Those are your only two spots, at least from the MCPC's opinion. Now, do we want to take a break between each uses to discuss each one, or do we want to?
Well, there's two things. When you said like where do we want, there's like how's the use defined, right? And what do we have in our code, and what would be better? And then the second question is where geographically would they be? And the thing about 5A is we tend to break 5A down into smaller districts, and we also break it down vertically, like ground floor and upper floor. So it's a little more complicated than 5A or 5B. There's some sentiment among some of us that some of these might actually be good in the 4B district. But I think the focus is mostly on the 5 districts.
The closest thing you're going to come to it is really restaurants or manufacturing, because it's kind of a blend of both, because you are producing a good, but you're also consuming a good in the same place. So that's really the closest we come in the code as it stands.
For something like a brewery or, okay. So we need to create a whole new definition, right? And so I think your recommendation is, if I'm correct, one of the options you presented was that we just create one umbrella definition for all the different permutations of this: a cidery, a winery, a meadery, a microbrewery, a distillery, and not have separate ones. I couldn't see any functional reason for us to have differentiations in our code between those things. And that the definition not really be tied to, as you just said, any kind of production quantities or anything. It's just a use.
Yeah.
But that what we would require in this use is that they have on-site sales and then off-site sales for carryout, but sales also for on-site consumption. So that would be the general definition. So I'm going to read where is the best description of the definition?
Alcohol production facility on page 2. So,
okay, business under Pennsylvania Liquor Board regulations that combines production of consumer alcoholic beverages, including but not limited to beer, wine, mead, cider, and liquor, with a space for on-site consumption and off-site sales. So that would be our umbrella definition to cover all these things. So now imagine we try to use that definition. Let's see how well it works. Let's imagine using it in Garber. So we have Montgomery Avenue, we have Haverford Avenue, we have Forest Essex. Where do we think those types of facilities would be appropriate? And does that definition really hold up when we apply it to using it in the...
Well, I think piggybacking off of the idea that establishing some kind of brewery, winery, distillery, whatever, within walking distance of public transportation to try to prohibit driving under the influence is a good idea. So if we were using that, if we needed a metric for that, I think half a mile is probably a good round number to start with, within half a mile of public transportation.
Well, that would kind of take care of the whole borough.
Yeah, so I was,
You're obviously not a heavy drinker.
I think I pressed one half a mile.
That's right, give me one beer. Yeah.
But that aside, I think Jennifer, we want to even think more fine grained than that. Like if we were going to say like, yeah, you could open up a small distillery where you have something in the back and a tasting room in the front. Would we want that? Is that okay on?
Yeah,
Have it for that?
anywhere.
Okay, so there'd be no place without being appropriate.
I would not recommend a second floor facility because of the weight of the tanks.
That's a structural issue.
It's up to the people who are in the building.
That's true.
And it could be a two-story space.
Yeah, that's right.
And they could
Tired
have
hands or something like that.
they could have some kind of gravity
Well,
figure.
I think it has more to do with scale.
we have a mixed-use requirement that would necessitate it to be on the first floor.
Well, if it's a commercial, if it's in a mixed-use
I
type
don't
of
know,
building,
I have to look at what the uses are.
it would have to be in a mixed-use building or a commercial building.
Or to the
It
mixed-use
would have to be
building.
on first,
It would have to be on the first floor.
but it could be on second
On a commercial
also.
building, it would be on the second floor.
Well, you could put it only on the second floor if you had another active use on the first
Well,
floor.
that's true.
But like you would,
Yeah.
but if you had that use, you would, that one would end up on the
You could
first
have your
floor.
tap room and retail on the first.
Right.
Although practically speaking, I can't imagine they'd want to spend the money on the structure to support those tanks.
Right, yeah.
Do we have a limit on square footage?
That's the next question I have, which
Okay.
is, if what we just said is basically, okay, we have this definition, pretty much all 5A, 5B is okay. Are there any other criteria that are important to you?
Square footage.
And tell me what you're thinking.
Well, how big is American Family Market?
6,000.
Is it 6?
That sticks in my mind from.
Yeah, I mean, there should be a limit of 5,000 or 6,000, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just holistically, do we want to start rethinking the square footage requirements we have in the code?
What are they?
I don't know.
I don't think we have a
I
max.
don't care.
We don't have a max.
The question is, are we going down that road?
I don't think you need to.
I hope not.
Yeah, I don't think you need to. You can have small distillery.
I'm sorry,
I don't think you need to have a bigger than.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood. I thought you said, you were saying we don't.
Oh, no, I think we should have a max.
Could they get a conditional permit if they were bigger or something?
What would the condition be?
Sustainable, green design.
I mean, they would, you know.
Condition is you have to do IPAs.
Well, it's just gonna be- Remember, this is, over time, this probably is not gonna be like a new building, it's squeeze a business moving into a building, right? So I don't know that a design related requirement is gonna necessarily make sense. It would, I don't know what you, I mean, if you wanted to have like a special exception or a condition, I mean, what would it be that they could do to be bigger than?
Nothing.
Okay.
I think that, but I do think there could be a difference between 5A and 5B. I mean, 5A should be smaller and 5B could be bigger. I would encourage more.
So here's the thing. I'm gonna sound kind of- Until we we made the recent amendment to the zoning code, which allows a building wider than 65 feet, the 65 feet width created a natural floor plate limitation, right? It was basically 65 feet wide, however deep your lot was, and we know, how deep the lot is, right? So it's not going to be that much
That's
different
interesting, okay.
than 6,500 feet. So that means that the only businesses that would be bigger than that would be ones that come into buildings that are approved through this mechanism. So in a way, that's the natural, unless I guess idea what they could do is they could rent a whole bunch of storefronts and put them together. Well, they could like have the YMCA building.
And they might have some fire separation issues there.
Oh, no, like, what about the YMCA building that's got a lot of storefronts in it?
Yeah, they might have some fire separation issues. I suspect they're demising partitions that are going.
Yeah, those are not insurmountable, though.
Yeah, they just put sprinklers.
Well, Dave, let's just assume those aren't
Yeah.
issues, because what we're trying to do is figure out, should there be a maximum size? And we can't count on that question to solve our
I
problem.
mean, the Rite Aid is about 12,000 feet.
So let's think about Haverford Avenue or downtown.
Downtown, the little gym building is, the floor plate is about 4,200 square feet. As comparison, the AmFam is 3,300 square feet.
What's the
Movie theater building block is, give me a second.
We do allow buildings on Windsor like 10,000 square foot floor plates.
Huh?
It's 100 by 100 is the maximum dimension. No,
Oh, like the tennis court thing?
what's that?
Which?
Yeah, the inflatable tennis court.
No, Windsor Avenue.
On Windsor.
Oh, in Windsor.
Yeah, where you have 200 foot, blocks that are a couple 100 feet long.
Yeah, okay.
We put a maximum 100 foot dimension for the building. So the maximum there in that area, the maximum floor plate is 90,000 square feet.
Theater block is around 8,900 square feet.
Wow.
But of course, theater auditoriums are set behind like a little storefronts, but.
Well, let's just ask a general question here, since Heidi raised it. On Haverford Avenue, North Narberth Avenue, do you think it makes sense to have a maximum square foot, a brew pub or any retail use? Since we now have the ability to have bigger floor plates because of the
I think, yeah, I mean, personally, I would aim for something like, 5,000 square feet or 6,000 square feet.
How big are the retail spaces that Ruben has in his building?
new one?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm sorry, Jim. I think she needs,
At the Rickland site, for example, because that's the biggest one, probably.
we could look it up.
They have some park.
I think it's 4,000 square feet.
Did for?
Because that's what rings a bell over there.
So he could have one tenant in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of about as big as you want to get.
Yeah, I would think so. That's pretty big.
So a limit of what? 5,000 feet? Would that be? Four.
Well, okay, sure. But I mean, that's where partly I feel like, with some of these uses, you have to know how much space it takes.
But on the other hand, they could just move to another street.
In some other town, you mean?
No, like they could move to Forest, they could move to
Montgomery.
Forest Avenue or Montgomery Avenue.
Montgomery.
So you're talking about Haverford and North Narberth, or you're talking about
5A.
5A? So they could move to Forest. They could-
I personally was raising Haverford and Narberth, but the conversation could go elsewhere.
And you said, what were you proposing?
I said 5, you said 4. And then originally
4,500.
he said 6.
I mean,
If I heard 3.
if you have a larger square footage on Montgomery, I mean, is it in our interest to try to encourage this kind of use more on Montgomery, next to the smoke shops?
Yeah.
I think it's sort of like we want to encourage this use anywhere, but we don't want it to be so big that it's
Overwhelming.
that it doesn't prevent other things from being.
Well, that's it's another reason to think about Montgomery.
Well, Montgomery, I bet we would all agree we don't really have any concern about a maximum size there, right?
Right.
It's mostly what would a maximum size be in any area of downtown. And so,
My concern about Montgomery is it staying exactly the same as it is today.
what's that?
I think my concern about Montgomery would be if it stays exactly the same as this today.
I like the idea of encouraging these kinds of places where there's public transportation.
Right.
Yeah, so can I also raise the fact
If you on
that,
Montgomery Avenue, you're gonna get people driving there, nobody's gonna walk.
There's a bus.
Well, there's a bus.
Yeah.
there.
In fact,
I
the
think the
new
bus-
bus
Nobody
lines
takes
are
that
only
bus.
going down Montgomery.
Nobody's gonna ride that bus to the.
Yeah, no, it's-
Every 3 hours.
Yeah, you'll be waiting.
Right, so can we just say no more than 4,500 square feet or 5,000 square feet? Is that same?
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, especially given that you've listed some
And that would, and
square
just thinking
footages.
all of the, like if you think about Essex and some of those old like single family structures, I think they're all below that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Well, I mean, so what do you know, 124? There aren't really that many floorplanes bigger than that.
How big is Metropolitan Management Building?
Well, the surgery center is almost 6,000 square feet. And that's an example too where it's narrow and deep, the building, and I think they have the parking lot as well. So if you were to redo that entire lot, it's a pretty big lot.
well, I guess your conditional use could be if you're doing an adaptive reuse of an existing space. If you're doing a new building, you have maximum square footage. And if you're adaptive
Like some
reuse.
buildings, like we'd all be happy if there was a brew pub in that surgical building, right?
Well, I think,
we
no, I
wouldn't
mean,
be happy if we took up all of-
I think we would, in life, if you drink alcohol, you probably might visit that place more often than the surgery center, but the surgery center is kind of an asset,
Well, plus, that's an existing building. I think maybe we're more concerned about as suggesting that they tear down all the walls between all the storefronts and create a bigger space. I mean, I
I
think
don't know that
that,
we can make that distinction though.
you don't think so?
I don't think so. I can't figure out how to practically do that.
Was there a limit on storefront width again? I mean, I feel like that's one of the criteria.
There is, unless you go through that saldo process, that there's a limit maximum for commercial buildings, and there's a maximum for mixed-use buildings, and then within the mixed-use buildings rule, there's kind of,
So wouldn't that control this issue of how big it is?
well,
Streets?
Kevin. Hey, Kevin.
I'm here.
Siri? So Kevin, what we're trying to figure out here is, how would you look at things if someone tried to, join together a bunch of existing retail spaces on Haverford Avenue into one big long retail space, even if it spanned a couple of buildings? Like, suppose, just for the sake of argument, they went all the way down from the cheese shop to the bakery. They said, we're gonna make this all one store. How would you?
I mean, if they were consolidating lots, they'd have to do that anyway. But I mean, I think somebody was just referencing table 4. There's maximum buildage or frontage build outs. So I'm trying to see how that would tie to a use. But that's tied to a property, and if it's tied to an existing building, typically we don't flag that. It's an existing nonconformity. So I think that's a good question to look into. In other words, could all of 230 Haverford be a big brew pub just for that sense?
He could actually build a building. There's that we in the latest revision we put this provision in that a building could be wider than 65 feet if it went through this saldo provision that we invented. So he could actually build the bigger building. That's why I was asking about consolidating existing buildings.
But he would need an approval to do that.
Yeah. Kevin, what we're trying to get our arms around is generally we'd like to have some sort of limit on the square footage of retail spaces, primarily on Haverford and Narberth Avenues, like around 4,500 square feet.
Yeah, I don't see a mechanism currently. I'd have to think about it, especially with existing buildings. Yeah, let me think on that. Or let me just skim through the code or find some sort of way to do that while you guys are talking.
Why don't we just say for the sake of tonight that sort of from again, I like to have things in a policy point of view, and then someone can kind of look at the code and figure out how it works, that we support a maximum retail size on Haverford and Narberth Avenues, say 4,500 square feet. Someone's gonna have to look and see how does that conflict with other parts like it. Okay.
Does it bother anybody that none of us have any kind of expertise in these things to know what kind of square footage they need?
obviously intensely.
Yeah.
We've been beating that drum for so many years.
The industry standard is 1,000 square feet per barrel.
Okay.
And a barrel is one of the giant tanks they use to brew.
Feeling a barrel, it must be like
But a barrel like a day or a barrel a year?
No, it's just like the physical structure.
So you sit behind the glass.
So yeah, big
for beer or for?
I just kind of forget my comment.
I don't know. I don't have.
Okay, we're throwing out square footage with no.
Well, remember, that this is very early. I mean, we're not like going to leave this meeting and then.
I think I hear some field trips coming up.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
Let's move on to studio.
Can I also flag one thing on that real quick, which is it, and this may be a little.
Excuse me.
Yeah,
I think Jen got it first.
you're right.
Oh,
correct.
I was just
Sorry.
gonna say, I feel mildly like crippled by creativity, thinking like, oh, well, what's the next distillery gonna look like? You know, and it's like, I don't know. So I lose sight of what the square footage should be. Please, take it away, Mike.
I only wanted to make one comment, and I know maybe this sounds radical or not, but it does feel perverse to have parking requirements for an alcohol establishment.
Oh, hello, half mile.
Hey, I mean, just, some cities are getting rid of their parking requirements. So just
It's pretty funny.
Those are for the people who work there.
Okay, let's move on.
Todd, one thing quickly, if you don't mind.
Let's try and keep the conversation moving. Kevin, what's that? What did you want to?
I think the best way to handle this is in section 304. There's performance standards for specific uses, and you can kind of create your own guidelines specific to that use in there.
I think they were saying more generally, but we could do it that way. For any number of uses.
The best man in my wedding owns a brewer. If you guys need help.
Let's move on to studio. Currently, our definition is an establishment in which fine art or crafts are manufactured and sold to customers, or fine arts training classes are held. And Tim, can you explain what your observation and recommendation is?
So one of the things we noticed is that studio only focuses on fine arts, but there are plenty of other studios as existing nonconformities within, because they're not really covered by any use. So like yoga studios, martial arts studios, dance studios, and then we also kind of added music studios and like other artistic or skill-based studios to our list of what we were kind of looking at. And because we noticed that these were kind of distant from, or these weren't in the code anywhere, we figured it'd be best to kind of incorporate that into studio, because they exist in kind of the same realm of where the fine art studio as defined is we're offering training and we're selling goods and products and experiences. So just kind of put it in with fine arts and make it one holistic use. So you're having your dance studio and your art studio being permitted in the same places, and it's just adding these uses to make sense with what already exists. So
basically expanding.
That's right.
Great.
Okay. Did you have a specific language on that, or?
So yeah, it's on page 5. It's taking the existing studio definition, saying an establishment in which fine art, music, film, or similar artistic craft are produced and may be sold to customers, or an establishment where classes, training, or practice space is provided for fine arts, yoga, fitness, martial arts, dance, or similar craft or skill.
Okay. Let's ask then, where would this apply? Would this be permitted? First of all, according to that use chart you gave us, the studio use now, could you just remind us where it's permitted?
It is conditional use in 3B, 3C, 4A. It is special exception in 4B, and is permitted in 5A, not as long as it's not on the first floor of Haverford, and it is permitted in 5B.
So 5A and 5B, except the ground floor Haverford, and many other parts of the are either conditional use or special.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Yep.
Can we, to keep our bookkeeping straight, extend that to Haverford and North Avenue, so we can, I think what I'd like to do is sort of make our rules for downtown more consistent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, great. Next is,
I'm sorry, wait. You said Haverford and Narberth, so you don't want Forest? You don't want S6?
well, no, it would be allowable anywhere in the 5A or 5B except the ground floor of Haverford and North.
Except the ground floor. Okay, so the restriction is only on the ground floor.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
anywhere else, like upstairs or in other states.
Well, so then I guess, I thought, so are we creating it as a separate use, or we're just packing it in which case it would already naturally be that, right?
Right, except it's quirky, the way the rule's written for studios, it's only Haverford. But I just asked to kind of make it consistent.
Yes, yeah.
We've begun to talk about Haverford and North.
Make it consistent with what we, yes, yeah, I got you.
Todd, just so you're aware, the current code does not anywhere have any use restrictions on the first floor of North Narberth Avenue. So if you want to change them all to be Haverford and North Narberth, that would be fine. But you do just want to change all of them that have currently restricted the first floor of Haverford?
I thought we, when we revised like surface uses and things like that we
did that for the and actually, I noticed that when we were looking back through the dispersion stuff that there was that disparity because we did the dispersion stuff for North Narberth and for Haverford, but the other ones that were done prior restricting first floor were only done for Haverford. But I think that for the sake of consistency, we should do that on both of those corridors.
Okay. Does everyone agree with me?
Because we can roll that into this update too, like all the office uses that are not permitted on the first floor in Haverford, if you want to include that on the first floor of North Narberth.
I feel like Chloe's our producer.
Yes,
There,
I
headset
know.
on, and we're chipping in to make sure we don't miss anything. Thank you, Chloe.
Yes, I think that'd be good.
Okay. Here, showrunner. That's right. Now we know the truth of things. Chloe's our showrunner. So finally, we get to entertainment venue, and which we currently define entertainment venue in our code as any building or portion of the building designed for assembly and viewing of live or recorded performing arts. And you, Tim, and your team are looking at expanding that, and also the concept of indoor recreational uses. So can you walk us through that, please?
Certainly. So the last item that we're looking at is basically recreation and entertainment, basically, or an indoor use to be used for fun and engagement. So we have an example of Lulu's Casita in Ardmore. It's essentially a play place for children. There's all kinds of games, there's music, but it acts as a flexible space. We have Angry Jack's Axe Throwing Club in Phoenixville. So basically axe throwing, which is a growing popular, it's a growing popular event space. And then we have Escapeopolis Escape Room in Lansdale. They didn't have any indoor pictures in our memo because they weren't showing any indoor pictures, but because that kind of might give away the escape room. But escape rooms are another big,
You gotta tell us, what the hell is an escape room?
So an escape room is you go to this place and you collaborate with friends and family to get out of the room by solving a multitude of puzzles that are within the room when you walk in.
You left out the first part. They lock you.
Yes.
Oh, no, it's all you have a time limit. You pay by the hour.
They don't actually lock you in.
An hour to figure out how
You can leave whenever you want, but you don't win if you leave before it's over.
Recreational. I know this is a generational.
How many
thing, but
people here have been to
You should
one?
just stick to the axe throwing thing.
You have?
First next place I went to was the brewery, so there you go.
Sounds safe.
Go ahead.
And then there's like arcades, which are your common, have been around for years at this point, so everybody should understand what those kind of look like. But we came out with two different recommendations. One where these uses are regulated by their own definition, or a second one where it's incorporated into entertainment venue. So first one is recreation venue, and this is kind of where we want your input heavily is, should this be its own use, or should it be free, or should it be attached to the way we describe entertainment venues? So our recreation venue is any building or portion of a building designed for public indoor recreation. This includes, but is not limited to, indoor rock climbing, arcades, escape rooms, axe throwing, indoor play and event space, or other similar uses. And then we have entertainment venue, where any building or portion of a building designed for public assembly and viewing of a live or recorded performing arts, or indoor recreation, including but not limited to indoor rock climbing, arcades, escape rooms, axe throwing, indoor play and event space, and other similar uses. So
And what would be the advantage of combining them, and what would be the advantage of keeping them separate between the two?
Advantages of combining them is keeping the code relatively simple, so these places would be more flexible. The advantage of keeping them separate, though, would be making sure that they are put in the right place if people don't feel that they don't fit in the same places as an entertainment venue would. And that's the other question that we want to ask is, where do you feel like these places kind of fit within Narberth? So, and right now, entertainment venues are special exception in 4B and permitted within 5A and 5B.
And the definition is very narrow. It doesn't encompass most of what you described.
It only covers recorded and live performing arts.
I guess my only question as to, and this probably speaks to the question of whether we want to keep them separate or separate them, is if you got a special, I haven't looked at what the special exception requirements are for it in 4B, but if you got a special exception for a fine arts space, and then you went to do a change of use, would you lose the special exception, have to go back through it, or could you like convert it to an arcade and you already have the special exception for the use category, so you...
That's a Kevin question. Kevin, are you still...
Yeah, I'm back. So I'm looking through that. So when you get special exception or a variance, it's not called a nonconformity. A nonconformity is something that exists without a permit. So the way nonconformities read are you can kind of go within the same subcategory, if that makes sense. Like you go from one retail to another, but you couldn't go from any type of retail to another specific type of retail, like within the own table 1 by right uses. But anything by special exception or variance, you couldn't just bounce from another, use that requires special exception or variance. You'd have to go back.
Yeah, so if I got a special exception for my specific use, I guess theoretically, like the operation, if it was the same operation, could continue under someone else. But if I went to change that use, I would have to go back for another special exception, regardless whether it's in the same category. Is that
exactly? Yeah, because it's not a nonconformity; it's something you chose.
Yeah.
Okay. So to be clear, if I had an escape room, which is an entertainment space, and I wanted to change it to an axe throwing room.
And if you were a special exception, you'd have to go back through the special exception process.
If you're defining those as different, like sub-uses, yes.
Well,
if you're calling them both entertainment uses in a general sense, no, you wouldn't have to go back. You're kind of yeah.
So I guess the question is, in my mind, the question for whether we want to break it out or not is really specific to 4B, because that's the only area where it wouldn't be just kind of permitted.
Yeah, and I think maybe we need to look at that a little separately.
So if you split it out and then you kind of and I hate that I'm saying this because I hate making things more complicated, but I feel like maybe we should just split it out so you don't run into some sort of absurd example where you're in 4B, someone's got, like, this is probably not going to happen, but you split it out and it's just, if there's a special exception, someone gets a fine arts venue, someone else comes in for a different, if it's in a different category, they have to go back to the special exception process. And you've kind of solved for that.
Are you saying that's a good thing or not a good thing?
Do I think that's a good, I mean, I think there's two different, I don't know that, I generally don't want to make things more complicated than they need to be, which I feel like I'm doing here, but I do think that there's probably like, what I'm concerned about is that if you're going through the special exception process in 4B, presumably the people that live in 4B showed up to that first special exception process. And what I'm concerned about is that if they like have an expectation of a fine arts thing, and then like a couple of years down the line, it turns into axe throwing, and then they might like kind of come up with pitchforks and be like, we were sold on this being a fine arts project. And so, you know, from that perspective, it makes sense to me that if we want to keep the categories consistent, there's flexibility within those categories, but you're basically still kind of the same thing.
Well, so the fine arts thing, if like it's a gallery, that would be, I guess, more like the studio, right? Or is that?
Right.
I was asking, you're meaning, just for clarification.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Entertainment venue, right?
I'm sorry, I meant performing arts. I was looking at the...
So that would be like a movie theater or I don't know, like a place where they play music or something.
Mm-hmm. Or live theater.
Live theater.
And that's different, a whole different category from the rock climbing place and the axe throwing place.
Yes, the question as to whether they would be the same category or different.
They're different than this proposal, right?
Well, no, the question was, that was the question.
You're saying they should be different, just because of the relative impacts on the neighborhood, if someone...
Yeah, I'm saying that generally I would want to keep them the same, but in this case, it makes sense to me that they would be different.
Right.
Two entirely separate entertainment venues.
Yeah, I mean, the use of those spaces is...
That's the clarification, kind of where we're seeking is whether or not they should be combined into one or be two different styles of entertainment venues, one being recreation and one being quote-unquote entertainment venue, so.
I think that was my thought too. I mean, if we're expanding, first of all, recreation venue is a new topic, right? It's not in our code right now.
Right.
So we'd also have to figure out, do you want that in 4B at all? Do you want that in 4B with a special exception? So that, if that's what concerns you, right? Because we were mostly talking about 5A and 5B.
I'm fine with having it. I mean, I'm fine with having more things in 4B and 4A as it is. I just didn't want a situation where folks had a certain expectation.
Right.
And then later on, it was like pushed around on them.
Well, you know, under the definition of recreation venue, you could start with like a little tot lot kind of place that's full of IKEA balls, you know, and it could flip over and be the axe throwing place where, you know.
Yeah, but I guess I mean, like you have to draw the line somewhere, right? And so that, you know, certain things have to be able to grow in other things. I think it's a question of like making those things pretty similar to the other things that they could change to.
Yeah.
And I don't know that like a performance space, like if you went in with that kind of being your expectation, it's a fine line. I think, like the way I think of it is like, again, like that's not a thing that would bother me individually, but in the interest in my mind of like 4A and 4B, I think are spaces that are probably appropriate for some sorts of like commercial-ish uses, and so I don't want folks to get like really freaked out about that.
I think practically speaking, the concerns people will have are noise and parking.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily that, you know, somebody's throwing an axe in there. You know, so the real question is, are these uses going to substantially change those characteristics of what's going on, you know, on those properties.
Our thinking when we discussed this was you're going to see probably a similar volume of crowd as if it was an entertainment venue than if it was a recreation venue. But the other thing is noise and act like entertainment venues, as described, can be relatively noisy exterior or more noisy than at least an indoor entertainment venue. Because axes when they hit wood are loud, kids when they're having fun are loud, but it's just where do you want to kind of, where do you kind of want to place them and like you said, is 4B acceptable.
We let all kinds of things in 4B. It's sort of incredible.
It's probably because we have them already.
Yeah. So, okay, is there anything else about this particular topic? Do you have the feedback we need, Tim?
So I have the feedback for alcohol, so I'm going to do a bit of research to see what's like the going size of some of these places, and then kind of look at section 304 to see if there are any standards that could probably be applied, particularly towards the downtown area, to make sure that these don't become a massive storefront and it's able to be broken up. So I know you guys were looking at 4,500 square feet as your going size as well. You all, and to correct me if I'm wrong, everybody is kind of fine with the studio, redefining the studios as we described them, but we also want to add the North Narberth second floor into the code.
Not allowed on North Narberth first floor.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's just like we want to encourage these things on the upper floors.
Same thing with the office uses.
Okay. Yeah. And the last thing I have in my notes is we're going to use recreation venue as its own use, and definitely 5A, 5B. And then, so 4B, do we want to treat it as a special exception, a conditional use? Or
we need to look into what the code now treats in special exceptions, the entertainment, right?
Yep.
So I guess we just need to look and see what those are, what those special exception requirements are. I think that's a good start for tonight. Okay. So if that topic is finished, then the last topic is public comment. Is anyone online who would like to make a comment? Who's tuned into Zoom? Can anyone see if there's anyone in Zoom?
only Kevin, Chloe, yep, and there's 3 participants, so.
Okay. No.
It's just me and Kevin and you. That's it. So we're good.
All right. All right then. So then we can entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. A second.
Second.
Your seconds all in favor. Okay. Let's turn off the recording.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.